Ambassador and AWS Community Builder. I do have a day job also, and that's as an architect at a company called CDL. We're actually based just down the road in Stockport. We're an insurtech, and we're focused around the use of data and AI to power digital insurance journeys. For me, AI coding assistants represent one of the most significant changes to software development in recent years. But successfully implementing them across an enterprise requires more than just deploying new tech. So today I wanted to share the journey of an actual rollout of AI coding assistants and the change we've made at CDL. So we'll examine how proper evaluation, testing, and most crucially, enablement can make the difference between simple adoption and a genuine transformation. So let's talk about developer productivity. Hopefully, though, not in the way you might expect. When we discuss AI in software development, there's often a focus on writing code faster. That completely misses the bigger picture, though. There's research carried out by software.com. It tells us something quite striking. Developers spend about 27% of their time on innovation and transformation. So the other 73%, well, that's consumed by meetings, running and maintaining existing applications, etc., etc. You probably recognize that. So let's think about that for a moment. That's less than 1 hour a day, typically, spent writing new code. The rest is debugging, reading documentation, going to stand-ups, analyzing metrics, configuring systems, and managing deployments. So this is why AI coding assistance matters right now. It's not about typing code faster. It's about fundamentally shifting this balance. It's about giving developers back their time for creativity and innovation. So as we explore CDL's journey, keep that context in mind. The story isn't about implementing a new tool, it's about transforming how our developers worked. So Matthias mentioned Q Developer before, so it's a generative AI-powered assistant for software developing, but describing it as just a coding assistant doesn't tell the full story. Q Developer goes far beyond code suggestions. So think about modernizing a legacy application, for example, traditionally a complex, time-consuming process. Q Developer can autonomously plan and execute these kind of multi-step projects, potentially accelerating development by up to 80% or so, AWS claims, and we'll look at some real-world figures later on. What for us though made it truly unique is its end-to-end approach. So whether you're writing code in your IDE, discussing architectural best practices in the AWS console, conducting security scans with automated remediation, Q Developer supports that entire development lifecycle. And this capability, this comprehensive approach that it's got, this is exactly why proper enablement becomes so crucial. So we've seen there that Q has got a broad range of use cases, but we essentially boiled it down to 3 key categories. So the first is retiring technical debt at scale by using Q's code transformation capabilities to modernize things like legacy Java and .NET applications. Then we have utilizing Q to drive developer productivity. So this goes back to the software development lifecycle and helping developers not just with inline code completions, but helping address the tedious and time-consuming tasks across all stages. So security scanning, troubleshooting, unit test generation, and more. And then finally, we've got infrastructure provisioning. So Q is trained to understand and help with the major infrastructure as code languages such as CloudFormation, CDK, and Terraform. So using Q and its knowledge of AWS, Q can be a great help for your infra engineers to create and manage their kind of templates faster than they ever did before. So let's start with the beginning of our transformation story. So in early 2024, AI code companions emerged as a significant trend as large language models evolved beyond web browsers. So at CDL, we have the architecture team that I'm part of, and we're tasked with thought leadership, advice to the CTO, helping shape our tech strategy and providing guidance on architectural standards such as the AWS Well-Architected Framework. We regularly assess and roll out new innovations across the enterprise. And we picked up on this trend of code companions and the challenge of how AI could be integrated into the development phase of the software development lifecycle. So we set ourselves some key requirements. Number one, we had to meet the engineers where they were. So the tools needed to be able to integrate with our two main IDEs. So at the time, this was IntelliJ and VS Code. We needed to have an affordable cost model and also flexibility around seats and subscriptions. We recognized that these AI coding companions were still in their early stages and were developing rapidly. So we wanted flexibility to move between different options if we needed to. We also wanted to be able to get hold of metrics to measure usage and adoption. We needed to be confident that CDL's intellectual property would be secure and not used to train the underlying large language models that back these coding companions. And we certainly didn't want to manage any more infrastructure, so we wanted to use a managed service. So the architect team and our principal engineers at CDL at the time had already been experimenting with something called AWS Code Whisperer, which was what Q was called prior to the rebrand. But we started a formal comparison of two tools, Amazon Q Developer Pro and then another tool. So we trialed an alternative code companion tool that was built into one of our other most used platforms. And essentially what we decided to do was arrange a bake-off between the two tools. So, and also follow that up with an extended trial to gain engineer feedback over a longer period of time. It was great to have staff from both AWS and the alternative code companion come with us on the journey and join us at CDL campus to run enablement and support sessions for all of our engineers. So, how do we plan the bake-off? Well, the architect team at CDL, we arrange multiple event days across the calendar year, and engineers are allowed pre-approved time to, away from their usual activities, to take part in these. So we have 2 innovation days where teams are able to take a day away from their normal activities and focus on trying out new approaches to drive innovation. We also have a 2-day hackathon where teams attempt to build a functioning product that solves a real problem. Often they're building on what they've learnt in their Innovation Day activities. And then we have 2 extra slots for focused learning days where we choose topics that are emerging in the world of software engineering. So we knew that given the trends across the industry, we needed to focus on AI. So Q AI Day. The itinerary for our first AI Day in August 2024, we had staff from AWS and the alternative code companion. They ran demonstrations in the morning to familiarize the engineers with the tools. And then we ran a set of interactive challenges. For Q Developer, we did a separate Java code transformation, so I'll talk a bit more about that later. But for the bake-off, comparing the two tools, we ran coding challenges. Basically, it was really important for us to respond with industry trends, not with more thought kind of exercises in the form of blog posts, but instead with actual focused learning opportunities where our engineers could get hands-on with these things. So, engineers in the afternoon, after they'd been trained on how the tools worked, they were tasked with recreating Fallout Terminal's hacking minigame. And this was a time box challenge set for 3.5 hours. And the requirements around the game were you had to have a command line interface implementation, you had to have 5 difficulty levels with based around word complexity, you had to be able to cope with dynamic password list generation between 5 and 15 words. Per difficulty level, you had to ensure that your word length was consistent. There were 4 attempts to guess the correct password, and you had position-based feedback after each guess, and your comparison logic had to be case insensitive. So basically the game took input from the command line, you ask the player for a difficulty level between 1 and 5, it generates a list of passwords and they try and guess what it is. So they go from no code to hopefully having that kind of solution built. So we had 40 developers across 8 career levels sign up to take part. So career levels at CDL, 8 is like super experienced principal type developers, and then the lower numbers are like people who are just getting started in their careers in software engineering. What we did is divided up the participants as evenly as possible into 3 groups. So we had the control group. These guys had no AI assistance whatsoever. We had the group we were using Amazon Q Developer Pro, and then the third group using an AI assistant from an alternative provider. And then, of course, we had to evaluate this, so we had to come up with some scoring criteria, which was a maximum of 5 points. So we focused on correctness. Did the actual program that the people created, did it actually function as intended? Did it generate the word list based around the difficulty? Did it handle guesses correctly, providing accurate feedback? Did it handle wins and losses correctly? We also scored for readability of the code. Was it well structured, easy to understand and commented? Did it follow what would be seen as coding best practices for the chosen language? And then we gave bonus points. So does the program offer additional features? Did they complete all of the requirements and go a stage further to offer more user value? For example, keeping track of guesses for reference. Did it handle user input errors gracefully? And did they actually get round to doing automated unit, component, or integration tasks? Crucially, the scoring was all done by a human. He was very busy. So, the results. Not all the participants were able to complete the task in the time allocated, but of those that completed, we took their average time, their score, and their career level. Again, the career level spanned from like 2 to 8, with 2 being people just starting out on their career and 8 being the principal level engineer. So, the alternative code companion allowed engineers with a lower average career level to complete the code kata more quickly. But looking at the full results, we can see that Amazon Q Developer significantly outstrips the other 2 groups when it comes to speed, as well as attaining a higher score. It should be noted that the only engineer to gain the full 5 points was in a group with AI assistance. So when we look comparatively, we see that Amazon Q Developer allowed the average time taken to be about 44% faster than the control group. While the score of the control group was close, it took the people in that group significantly longer for them to complete the actual task. So, obviously, a single code kata doesn't prove real-world productivity gains, but the exercise gave us an interesting insight into how a code companion tool would actually fit into a software development lifecycle, particularly when we're doing like rapid prototyping. We also took anecdotal evidence, so developer feedback was very positive. Bear in mind, this was an early version of Amazon Q Developer as well. It was, when we initially tested it, it was without the so-called reasoning capabilities that you started to see in 2025. IDE, and then the code suggestions they could either accept or reject. The code suggestions and the chat were the only features at the time that we were testing. We didn't have like inline suggestions or chain of thought at this point. So, what did we do next? Well, over the next 3 months, we had about 100 engineers using a mixture of Q Developer Pro and the alternative tool. So we measured usage of the tool using the available metrics, and then continually gathered developer feedback. We trusted the engineers to track their experiences as well. What we did was created a specific MS Teams channel for feedback. We didn't solely make our decisions on usage metrics, because it's very easy to game the system. So the developers reported using the tools to help them generate things like merge request descriptions, improving the code review experience, and generally being highly beneficial throughout their day-to-day tasks. Eventually, after the 3 months, we looked at the data and we made the choice to offer a code companion to any engineer who wanted one, and we chose Amazon Q Developer Pro as our primary code companion of choice. We also ensured during this time that we had ongoing development. Obviously, on both sides, both tools were undergoing active development from their suppliers, And we basically brought in additional enablement support, primarily from AWS for Q Developer, where we could look at the new features, get some training, and in fact we had a second AI day that we ran in March this year. So why did we choose Q Developer? Well, for us, there were two kind of standout things. One, the code transformations. So at the time, this was a unique feature to Q Developer. During the first AI day, we took a team, as well as the code kata that we were doing, and we took a legacy Java 8 application and asked them to upgrade it to Java 11. And the team on that single day was able to get around 60% of the way through migrating it. Like I say, this was a unique feature at the time to Q. The other key thing for us was the subscription model. We were aware that this area was rapidly evolving and new tools were coming out all the time with better models. So we didn't want to get into a situation where we would basically sign up to a couple of years worth of a tool and it changed and something come out and that blasted it out of the water. So Q Developer follows an elastic seat allocation model, so we can add and crucially remove, if we need to, subscriptions month to month. The alternative tool that we tried required signing up to purchase a fixed number of seats over a minimum of a year. So this flexibility about rolling out Amazon Q or rolling back if we need to was a real benefit for us. But also, it's not just the kind of tools that are evolving quickly. We're at the stage now where we're thinking about how do we make the whole process faster. Our existing software development methods are designed for human-driven processes with product owners, developers, architects spending a lot of their time on non-core activities, again, planning, meeting, and the traditional software development lifecycle rituals. So this is where we're going to introduce the idea of AI-driven development, or AI DLC. This came out at the end of July. I'm still getting to grips with this. It is very new, and I think it's fair to say it's still early days, but I wanted to mention it in case you were looking at code companions, and because it's not just a tool, often organizational change needs to happen to get the most out of new tech. So, as you heard earlier on, there's a new Amazon IDE called Kiro, with the concept of spec-driven development, and I think that the two align really well. So spec-driven development is a kind of key part of AI DLC. The paper on AI DLC you can get to by scanning the QR code. At the moment, there's kind of very little out there, I would say. There's the blog here, there's the paper, there's a kind of video on YouTube that somebody seems to have recorded. I don't think they perhaps should have done. So my feedback to you is please get more stuff out there about this. But we'll look in a little bit more detail from what I know about it, and how we're starting to think about how we're going to evaluate AI DLC at CDL, basically, in October. So AI DLC is an AI-centric transformative approach to software development. There's kind of two key dimensions to this. First is AI-powered execution with human oversight. So this is where AI creates the detailed work plans, actively seeks clarification and guidance, and defers critical decisions to us, the humans. So this is really key because it's only us that really possess the contextual understanding and knowledge of the business requirements that's really required to make informed choices. The other dimension is dynamic team collaboration. So as AI handles the routine tasks, the idea is that teams unite in a very collaborative space for real-time problem solving, creative thinking, and rapid decision making. So this is a shift from kind of isolated work to really short, high-energy teamwork, hopefully, so the paper claims anyway, accelerating innovation and delivery. So at its core, AI DLC operates by having AI initiate and direct software development workflows, so very different to us doing that today. So this pattern where AI creates a plan, asks clarifying questions to seek context and implement solutions, only after kind of receiving that human validation, repeats rapidly for every software development lifecycle type activity. As with any new kind of framework, there's some terminology to get to grips with, of course. So we're going to briefly cover that. An intent in AI DLC is the statement of what needs to be achieved. So this might be a business goal, a feature, or a technical improvement. It's essentially the starting point for the AI-driven decomposition into actionable tasks. And then we have the units. So these represent self-contained work elements derived from the intent, specifically designed to deliver some sort of measurable value. And then the bolts, these emphasize this intense focus and high velocity delivery with kind of build validation cycles measured hopefully in hours or days rather than weeks. So units can be executed through one or more bolts. They might run in parallel or they might be sequential, but AI will plan the bolts with developers and product managers doing the validation of that. And then finally we've got the deployment units, which are the operational artifacts. So you've got your package, executable code, your infrastructure components that are tested for kind of functional acceptance, security requirements, non-functional requirements, other sort of risks. AI generates the associated tests, and after human validation, we'll make adjustments to the tests, and then basically AI will again execute the analysis of results and then correlate any failures back to more code changes, configuration changes, or changes in the dependencies. So within AI DLC, there's 3 phases. So the inception phase focuses on capturing those intents and translating them into units for development. So this phase uses mobbing. So AI DLC says that this happens in a single room with a shared screen led by a facilitator. Who works at home today? Yeah, I'm not too sure about this bit. I'm very interested to see how this works in a hybrid situation. But essentially during mob elaboration, AI plays that central role in proposing the initial breakdown of the intent into user stories, acceptance criteria, and units, leveraging the domain knowledge of the group. Product managers, developers, QAs, other relevant stakeholders, they're the mob, and they're collectively reviewing and refining these AI-generated artifacts. So this mob elaboration should hopefully condense weeks or even months of sequential works into hours, so the paper claims. So construction phase, this is the iterative execution of the tasks, transforming the units defined during the inception phase into tested, operationally ready deployment units. So AI generates detailed code from logical designs, mapping components to appropriate AWS services, adhering to well-architected principles. This phase then concludes with kind of automated testing to ensure functionality, security, and basically operational readiness. Again, developers, their focus is on validating the AI-generated output at each step and making crucial decisions and ensuring the quality. So AI's role throughout the process is recommending tasks, providing options, design patterns, user experience tests, etc. for each task. Again, because of this, AI DLC, the paper recommends that this is done with the team co-located in a single room. Finally, the operations phase centers around the deployment, observability and maintainability of the system. Again, leveraging the idea here, leveraging AI for operational efficiency. So AI is used to actively analyze your telemetry data, your logs, detect patterns, identify anomalies, predict potential SLA violations, and also enable proactive issue resolution. So we talked about MCP before, so AI could integrate with existing runbooks, for example, proposing actions and recommendations such as resource scaling, and then go on, if you agree, to execute those actions. Developers are serving as validators in the operations stage as well, so ensuring that the AI-generated insights and the proposed actions align with things like SLAs and compliance requirements. So another area where I'm seeing some benefits of AI DLC is helping reduce cognitive load. So how often has somebody here like joined a new company or team and then spent days or weeks like getting up to speed with like how that particular team works? I certainly have. There are often organizational constraints, policies, processes, internal best practices that you need to onboard with before you get to writing a single line of code. So this is where steering can potentially help. So instead of reading kind of lots of documents, this is actually embedded, this knowledge, this context is embedded inside the development tools you use. Steering provides persistent knowledge about your project, typically through markdown files. So instead of kind of explaining your conventions in every interaction, whether that's an AI interaction or a human interaction, steering files ensure that the AI consistently follows your established patterns, libraries, and standards. So the benefits around this, you got consistent code generation, so every component or API endpoint or test follows your team's established patterns and conventions. Reduce repetition, you get team alignment, so all developers work with the same standards whether they're new to the project or they're a seasoned contributor. And you're scaling your project knowledge as well, so the documentation is growing with your code base, capturing decisions and patterns as your project evolves. So I wanted to show you this in Kiro. So hopefully this is clear, but I will describe it as we go along. So there's two Kiro sessions here. The session on the left has no steering. So I'm going to give each one the same problem, and they will both do a good job at resolving them, but the one on the right has specific steering. So in this case, what I'm asking it to do is build a data processing Python job that processes a customer JSON input file and then processes each customer. It calls an API to undertake an action, and for every API call we want to log that because we're going to charge on an API consumption basis. So at CDL we have lots of APIs and we obviously want telemetry around how customers are using it. So we have a standard pattern called our billing blueprint. So our billing blueprint in the session on the right has been added as a markdown document. And in that it says, at CDL, when you're trying to collect billing information, you must use Amazon EMF, so Embedded Metric Framework, which is part of CloudWatch. That's just how we've chosen it. You can do it another way. That's the way we prefer. So we're giving Kiro here the same problem. The session on the left is going to generate code and it's going to solve the problem, but it's going to basically log out the billing information to a text file, which kind of works, but it's not in the CDL standard way. This one, it brings in all of that context, all of that steering, and it decides to write the code to use EMF. It uses that CloudWatch feature because that's the way it knows we do it at CDL. So you can kind of see this spec-driven process as well. It's kind of got the problem, it's turned that into requirements, it's got the acceptance criteria. Now me as a human, I'm going through and validating this. And it basically moves on through the design and then the tasks where it's writing code. So this is definitely a story to be continued. AI DLC, as I said, it's at a very early stage. I'm still learning a lot about it and looking at ways and how we evaluate this at CDL. I would definitely love to hear like feedback from the community and examples if other groups have got further than I have, certainly. And yeah, again, I'd echo like my thoughts before about AWS pushing more stuff out about this. I know they are working on it, to be fair. So to kind of wrap up. So since adopting a code companion, we've been focusing on this continual enablement. So we arranged for AWS to come in and help us run that second AI enablement day in March. Since that last day, we've seen and I checked this this morning, it's actually gone up. The previous version of this talk said 2x improvement. It's actually gone to 3x improvement in adoption of Q Developer. So from 30 daily active users to now 100 daily active users. We've got a 2x increase in the acceptance of the suggestions that the tool is putting out. And this was correlated with the education and the tooling improvements. And 2/3 of our developers, so we've got about 150 developers, 2/3 of them are now using Amazon Q Developer every day to help them. But this ongoing enablement is really key to increasing and continuing the adoption of these tools. Amazon Q's developers' new reasoning capabilities were a real game changer for us, enabling rapid and accurate code generation with better prompting. Adoption, we see it grow significantly thanks again to the ongoing support from AWS, as well as improvements in the tooling itself. It's really important to gather engineer feedback and then also work with AWS to optimize the tool. Nothing is perfect, but you can pass that back to AWS, and we have seen them change the tooling in response to that, which is great. So some tips to finish. Let this kind of value discovery kind of happen organically. Focus on real world use cases. I can't emphasize this enough, but enable that team-wide participation and maintain that consistent engagement. We still have messages on MS Teams most days about little niggles with the tool, which we pass back onto AWS, and people help each other out by changing the prompts and stuff like that. So document both your wins, but also your challenges, and give that feedback to AWS. Have some success metrics, so usage rates, code review time reduction, documentation efficiency, bug resolution speed, developer satisfaction scores, team collaboration impact, workflow integration feedback, so coming back to the MCP stuff. And what I would describe as documenting those aha moments, that point where developers and engineers really get on board with it. We're at that point now where we say to people, if we took this tool away from you, what would you do? And they were like, we don't want, it has its problems, but we can't do without it. So when you get to that point, you know you're onto a winner. So we've seen implementing Q Developer really just isn't about new technology. Success demands enablement to be provided, and we're changing really the way developers are working. We're asking developers to think differently, moving beyond copying and pasting, from like Stack Overflow to understanding context-aware suggestions and learning how to frame problems for AI assistance. It's a fundamental behavior change, and this is coming as well with AI DLC. Developers potentially need to shift from traditional coding patterns, adopting new problem-solving approaches, rethink how they approach documentation, testing, the whole development workflow. So reaching that maximum value requires mastery of prompt engineering, understanding AI's limitations, because there are some, building the right level of trust as well through proper validation of AI. And finally, again, AI and tools like Q Developer, they're evolving at unprecedented pace, and that transformational changes since release, it really shows no sign of slowing down, so that really makes that continuous enablement absolutely essential. I realise I've gone a couple of minutes over time, so that is all from me. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave with this shameless plug for a session that I'm doing at the Dublin Cloud Day later this month, but thank you very much for listening.